Okay, today what we're looking at is our goal. I can use secondary trig ratios to solve angles. And actually we'll also use it to find ratios. Now, it's section 4.3, and you already have noticed that we're doing it slightly different than the textbook. Okay, secondary trigonometric ratios. So secondary trigonometric ratios are also called reciprocal ratios. Okay, so sometimes you hear reciprocal trig ratios. They're interchangeable depending on what textbook you have and depending on who you're talking to. So although we are learning about these ratios, they're not usually very useful. Okay, and you're saying, well, why do we have to do it? Well, there's a reason why we do it. But first of all, let's talk about why they're not useful. First of all, guess what? Our calculators do not have these ratio buttons. So that's a big issue for us because it means we're going to have to find some way to use our calculators to give us the information we want. The other reason why it's not useful, because if they're reciprocals of the primary ratios, which they are, um, why not just use SOHCAHTOA? And that is very true. Now in grade 12, you actually prove identities, and you use secondary trigonometric identities for some of those. So this is an introduction to that. All right, so that's why we do it, and that's why I think it's not that useful for this year, but you still have to be able to do it. Okay, so let's talk about sines reciprocal. Now, sines reciprocal has a name called cosecant. Okay, so sine, cosecant. Now, obviously, when we use sine, we use the letters sin. Well, if I use the first three letters of this, it would be cos, which would be cos. So that's not going to work. So what they do is they use cosecant. So that's the short form. So cosecant theta. Cosine's reciprocal is called secant, and the short form for that is secant, S-E-C, theta. Okay, and then we get to tangent's reciprocal, and tangent's reciprocal is called cotangent, and so we use cot, C-O-T theta. Now, I'll be perfectly honest, when I was in high school, I really got confused between this one and this one. Because whenever I saw this, to me it made sense that C should go with cosine and S should go with sine, and it was the opposite. So what I always looked at is what they did is they took the sine and they smushed it in between. That's just the way that I remembered it when I was in high school. You maybe have to come up with another way for yourself to remember. So the reciprocal for sine is cosecant. The reciprocal for cosine is secant, and the reciprocal for tangent is cotangent. And it really means that when we're talking about reciprocals, you already know that sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So the reciprocal of that would be hypotenuse over opposite. And so that is what cosecant theta is equal to. Cos is adjacent over hypotenuse, so secant is hypotenuse over adjacent, and tan theta is opposite over adjacent, and so the cotangent is adjacent over opposite. Now, I'm going to be perfectly honest, I really do not memorize these this way. I just don't do that. So I don't remember that cosecant is hypotenuse over opposite. What I remember is this sine theta is like SOHCAHTOA, and I remember that sine goes with cosecant, cos goes with secant, and tangent goes with cotangent. Okay, so the thing is you want to come up with a way that you're not memorizing a lot of things that you can get easily confused with. You already know SOHCAHTOA, so it makes sense that you use that to then apply it to this. So what exactly are we going to do with these? Okay, we're going to do two different things. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to find an angle. So for instance here, it says calculate theta. And notice it gave me secant theta equals 1.2645. Another thing that you'll notice with these is because they're the reciprocal, the numbers don't have to be less than 1 for sine and cosine. Okay, so that's another thing that's a little bit different. Okay, so step number 1 is going to be the following. Oops, that's step number 2. I don't want that one. Step number 1 is here. Okay, first thing I need to know is what is the reciprocal of secant? Okay, so that's the very first step. Now, the reciprocal of secant is cos. Okay, so I know that it's cos. So the second step is I'm going to replace this secondary with 1 over the primary. So this is exactly what I'm going to do. So I'm going to get a pen now to do this, and I'll do it in green just because I like green. So it says to replace it, the secondary, with 1 over the primary, because that is what a reciprocal is. So that means that secant theta is the same as 1 over cos of theta, and that means that's equal to this. Now the second step is what we want to do is because I'm going to set up a ratio for this, and so I'm going to write 1 over the ratio given. So this is the ratio they gave me. So I'm actually going to write 1 over it. Hopefully it stayed. Yes, it did stay. So I'm going to take that and put it over 1. So now I have a ratio. And what I'm going to do then is I'm going to cross multiply and divide. Now you can see, I'll do it with this one, but the next one I'll do a little bit faster. So obviously I'm going to have 1.2645 cos theta equals 1 times 1. I need to get cos theta by itself because my calculator knows how to do that. And when I divide both sides by that, I end up with 1 over 1.62645. Okay, so that's one way to do it. Okay, so the next step I have to do then is I'm going to turn this into a decimal that I'm going to then use for my calculator. So when I take my calculator and actually divide 1 divided by that, I end up with 0.7908. And now to find theta, I'm going to take the cos inverse of that number. So now my calculator has a cos button, so I have no problems then determining what theta equals. And when I plug that into my calculator, I end up with that theta equals 37.7 degrees. Okay, so you're thinking, well, that was kind of stupid. We just switched it to the primary. That's right. We switched it to the primary, and that's what we have to do. So when I'm looking at something like this, the steps that I would need to see for marks is I would expect to see this one, for sure. Okay, that one and that one. This in between one, no. Okay, you don't have to give me that. Whether you then do cos inverse with the 1 divided by that, that's fine. You could do that or change it to the decimal. So I prefer to see this. And whether you give me this or not, I'm not too concerned about, but I definitely want to see this. So those are the steps I would like to see in your solutions. As I said, some of those other in-between ones, not so bad. You don't have to do those. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. So we're going to follow the same steps, just do it a little bit faster. And I think I'll stay with the purple because I like purple too. I think I like every color. So cosecant theta. Okay, so what is its reciprocal? Well, Remember, that's the S being squashed in between the two C's, so that is the same as sine. So this is the same as 1 over sine of theta is equal to this. And remember, I'm going to cross multiply and divide all in one step, so that means that sine theta is actually equal to 1 over 2.9645. And I do change mine to the decimal, 0.3373. And my angle theta is going to be the sine inverse. And if you notice, it's not that bad really after you've done your flipping the reciprocal part. And so now theta, when you take your calculator, is approximately 19.7 degrees. Okay, and we'll do one more. And this is calculate theta. And this time we have cotangent. Cotangent equals 0.2594. So let's switch to blue so no color gets left out. Again, this one's a little bit easier, cotangent, so that's my tan, so that's 1 over tan. And I'm just going to do this here because I think my writing pen would like it. And yes, I'm talking to myself. Equals 0.2594. So when I cross multiply and divide, I get tan theta equals 1 over 0.2594. My theta then is going to be the inverse of tan, and that is 3.8551, and that equals 75.5 degrees. Now we do have some more examples on the next page, but what I'm going to explain here, this isn't necessarily hard. The hardest thing is to remember what secondary trig ratio goes with the primary one, okay, and understanding that it's the reciprocal, okay. Now, some people prefer to write right away tan theta equals 1 over the ratio, and that works as well, okay. And if you notice, we have that step right here, okay. And if you didn't happen to give me this step but gave me that, that would be fine too. I'm not going to take marks off for that. Okay, so that's the hardest part, is to remembering what goes with what ratio. Okay, now I'm going to pause, well, stop the video and start a second part. It won't be near as long as this first part.